Hello, my name is Brandon Klein, and my favorite thing is nonfiction storytelling.
Welcome to the Finding Favorites podcast, where we explore your favorite things without using an algorithm. Here's your host, Leah Jones.
Hello, and welcome to Finding Favorites. I'm your host, Leah Jones, and this is the podcast where we learn about people's favorite things and get recommendations without using an algorithm. Today's guest came to me in one of the best ways I get to meet new guests, and that is through a mutual friend. Brandon Klein is a Detroit area-based meditation coach, podcast producer, amateur tennis player, and author. And we were introduced by our mutual friend, Jonathan Eisen, who used to be in Chicago, and I think we let him move back to Michigan. Brandon, how are you doing today?
I'm grounded, kind of contemplative today. Also kind of very task-based because I have a show coming out tomorrow that I'm releasing. And so I'm like trying to figure out what I missed.
Yeah.
So it's like that mode of like scared to let something out into the ether.
Tomorrow's the premiere episode.
Tomorrow's the premiere episode, yeah.
That's exciting. Let's just get into it. What is the project coming out tomorrow?
Goodness, just so you know, I'm self-conscious about not reciprocating the how are you. So if there's room for me to ask that, I will. But I'll also answer your question because I don't want to deflect. The show's called Humanize the Human Eyes. It's like a short form conversation interview show.
Nice.
All of my projects start from me just wanting to learn a skill.
Okay.
And then the final product is the final product.
Nice.
And the skill I wanted to learn was short form storytelling because I've only done long form podcasting when I make something. Like I just kind of release it as it was recorded. But this time I got like 50 minutes, 60 minutes-ish of tape from 9 different people and then cut it down in Descript to like 6 to 10 minute stories interspersed with like different footage of them doing their thing, their craft. So yeah, tomorrow's the first episode and we'll see what happens.
Well, and likely, given the way I already described to you that this day is going to go, it will have released a week ago by the time this episode comes out.
That's right.
So you wanted to switch from long form to short form storytelling. That's cool.
Yeah, just for this project, I just felt like I'd done so much of it. Also, my day job is for a podcast network, and I don't want to say they're short form because they're not short form. They're like longer episodes, but they cut down, they tell stories from like the long form tape. And I'd never done that. Yeah. And I was just like, I want to know what that feels like to like sit down with a bunch of tape. Descript is like an AI transcription software for anyone who doesn't know. And you basically can read it like a Word doc. And so I found it so fascinating to dive in and be like, what story would do the most service for this person that I just interviewed? As if I'm presumptuous enough to know. But, to do my best. And they were all friends, so I know them a little bit.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. So I started podcasting in spring of 2020, like many people. This was my COVID hobby. I got all those hours back from my commute and wasn't seeing anybody. And I was like, I have to find a way. Well, no, I did the podcast. I started the podcast for different reasons. The benefit was then I got to talk to at least one person a week for an hour about something that wasn't COVID. And that's what I've really glommed onto is like what was so good about starting this podcast then. But Descript didn't exist in 2020. Riverside, which I used to record, didn't exist in 2020. Even when I started using Riverside, it didn't have the AI tools or that type of transcript editing that exists today. And I do wonder sometimes. So I started recording on Zoom, editing on Adobe Audition, because a friend of mine at iHeartRadio said he would teach me. That was the tool he would teach me. I was like, okay, I will buy that tool then. Or I will rent that tool from Adobe because you don't buy anything anymore.
That's right.
So I do wonder sometimes, like if I were to start today a new podcast, or if I were a new podcaster starting today, I think you would pick like either Descript or Riverside to be your recording, transcript, and editing. I think you would do it all in one of those. Is that what you're finding on this? Like, what's it like to move into Descript and get to, because I tried it for a week and it was so different that I couldn't. I just couldn't get there.
mean, go on for hours. Yeah, so I'm the production manager for the company I work for. So I'm actually in charge of like implementing these systems. So your question is specifically geared to what I'm thinking about day to day. At the network, we use Descript and Riverside. Most of our interviews are remote. So we're shipping kits to the guests, recording, taking the footage from Riverside to Descript.
Okay.
For what I'm doing in my own show outside of that network is all the interviews are in person. So I'm bringing cameras to their location, recording like at wherever they do their craft for the most part.
Yeah.
And then I'm putting it into Descript to cut the story. The downside with Descript is that you can start to treat it so much like a Word doc that you lose like the humanity when you're making the cuts because you're not thinking about it. So that's something I learned after this first season. People will notice after they watch, like they might notice I made too many cuts and because I treated it like a Word doc. So that was a learning.
Yeah. That makes sense that you could grab a phrase from one part of the interview and move it. But then like the tone of voice is a little too different or the pitch. Yeah. I can imagine that.
Right. And I'm an avid editor. Like I used to work for a magazine in college and I'm writing. And so I think I treated it too much like a book or an article than a video piece. So that was a cool learning.
Yeah. So how do you know our mutual friend Jonathan?
I don't know who did the connection. It was I had just moved back to Michigan. I was living in LA and New York working podcast jobs. And I had just moved back. This is where I grew up. In Metro Detroit. And I just moved back and my episodic memory fails me. I have very little of one anymore. But someone connected me with Jonathan. We met in Ferndale, Michigan for coffee. And then I think since then we've probably met like 3 times.
Yeah.
Like with 2 or 3 months in between. At different events or just one-on-one. And such an enigmatic personality in like the most beautiful way. Just so pure, open-hearted. And I always find that I have full permission to just like be completely open with Jonathan. Yeah.
Yeah. We're both alumni of the ROI community, which is a international Jewish innovation network. And I was the Chicago alumni coordinator for many years. And that's how I got to know him was during his Chicago years as a alumni of the same group.
Has Jonathan been on this show?
I don't know if he has not.
Okay.
He sends me people though, and he listens because we've had mutual friends that he didn't know they were mutual friends. And he'll reach out and be like, wait, how do you know Aaron Gadiel or something like that? Yeah.
It's beautiful. Yes, serving as more of a facilitator than a subject.
Yeah. Yeah. But he's great. I'm glad he's back in the Detroit area.
Yeah,
I'm happy for him. I'm sad for Chicago.
Yeah, were you from Chicago, or were you like spending a lot of your time growing up there, or was that kind of a transplant for you?
I moved here in 2002, a few years after college, so I've been here 23 years. Longer than I've been anywhere else.
Okay.
Like I'm from Indiana. I went to school downstate. I went to school in Decatur. Spent 3 years in Colorado. Found out that I am very indoorsy. Colorado was wasted on me.
Yep, fair enough. That would not be the right fit.
It wasn't the right fit.
Chicago is the right fit.
Yeah. No, I love Chicago. Left briefly, moved to London for like a winter, tried that out. Also not a London girl. So no, I'm Chicago.
Well, we share our Midwest roots.
Yeah. So you're back, you're from the Detroit area.
Yeah. And I'm back. I'm just like, you know what? I did it. I roamed around enough.
Yeah.
Part of my grounding intention, which is big for me right now, is being in a place and setting roots.
Yeah. I find that Detroit and St. Louis and Minneapolis are like the 3 big Midwestern cities that people who grew up there they want to like spread their wings, and they come to Chicago, they go to New York, like they go, but those cities have a gravitational pull that brings people back in ways that like even I don't think Chicago does. People come to Chicago who aren't from here, but people return to Detroit, St. Louis, and Minneapolis.
Yeah, my sister's doing it right now. She's in Chicago, but
she'll be back.
That's right.
Awesome. So your new project, Humanize the Human Eyes.
Yeah, that's right.
People can find it. Is it on their podcast app? Is it Instagram? I know.
No, I'm just throwing it on YouTube, on my YouTube channel. I'm really big on video shows. It's always been something I've gravitated towards. But I am having a growing appreciation for audio only now, especially being at the podcast network I'm at, especially for, I don't want to say more passive listening, because I think that kind of degrades the experience of it. But, especially if you're on the move or doing something, the video show does require you to be pretty still. Yeah.
I find that the video clips of podcasts will get me into a new it's probably the best way. It's the best podcast discovery other than guests. Like, you hear someone on a few different podcasts and I expand my list to include them. So the beginning of this podcast was a mind map of me trying to figure out why I listen to the podcast I listen to. Right? Started with Gilmore Guys, then West Wing Weekly, and then from Gilmore Guys, I get to Jason Mantzoukas, I get to How Did This Get Made, I get to that whole world of UCB LA podcasts.
Yeah, I did UCB in LA when I lived there. Yeah.
Okay. So that whole like Headgum Earwolf classics.
Oh yeah.
But that's all from Gilmore Guys. That's all Kevin T. Porter directed. And then that for me has become like, these are the comedians I go see in live shows. I make sure if Nicole Byer comes to town, I see her. I travel to see podcasts now. But it's all because there was a Gilmore Girls reboot coming out on Netflix, and I started listening to one podcast. So new podcasts for me are video clips on TikTok that I see enough that that then I become curious to listen to the audio, but I am rarely going to make time for a video only podcast.
Yeah, and I'd say the majority of the people in my life are more similar to you than to me.
Yeah. But I'm also like I've got friends for whom YouTube is as important as a cable used to be, or TV. They have YouTube on their TV, and so all the podcast studios wouldn't be adding video if it wasn't important.
Yeah, we just started doing it at the network I work for day to day. We were audio only for years.
Yeah.
And just started doing video.
Oh, nice. I'm looking at your list of things. Can I ask you a little bit about meditation coaching before we get into your favorite thing?
I'd be shocked if there's a question I'd be not cool with. Follow your curiosity, and I'll just talk about the UCB improv, right? And I'll yes, and. Yeah.
Where does becoming a meditation coach, if you're doing New York, you're doing LA, you're doing improv, where does meditation sneak in there as something important to you? And then important to you enough that you become a coach to teach others?
So I'm one of my favorite things to talk about nonfiction storytelling is also figuring out the story of my own life, especially because in conversation, right? Like in order to tell you who I am or who I think I am, I need to have some kind of story or narrative about myself. And how well do we know ourselves? Well, good question, right? As well as we think we can. It's more the opposite. The other stuff snuck into a meditation. But in short, I went to grad school for clinical psychology. And then it was a doctoral program in clinical psych. It was supposed to be 6 years. After a year, just was doing some serious self-discovery, got, a lot of angst. I ended up leaving after getting my master's. It was at that point that I taught meditation for 4 years back in Michigan to all sorts of groups. And then it was actually from there that the media stuff started coming in, and
Okay.
like the improv and like proclivity for comedy. I started filming myself talking about meditation. And I was like, I like making media.
Mm-hmm.
Then I made this absurdist hot tub debate show. And then I moved into my van for a little bit and interviewed people around the country. And then it was at that point that I did start studying a little bit of like absurdism, old late night talk show stuff. That's when I then really became interested in the podcast stuff when the pandemic hit.
Yeah.
And I kind of lost my meditation work. I then was like, oh, I'll just be a podcast producer, learned audio and video gear. So that's kind of where it all pops in. And then you brought up a good point. Where does like meditation and improv fit in? They're just similar concepts in different disciplines.
Right.
You know, meditation is all about distancing enough from your thoughts so that you have more of a chance to behave in a way that's in line with your values. Improv, I don't want to overspeak because I only took 101, but improv is a chance to let your mind settle enough so that you can do what happens instinctively. And so to me, those are hand in hand.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess if I just stop for even a second, when I listen to like hardcore improv, people who've been doing improv for 20 or 30 years, they do talk a lot of, it's about being present, and it is about, right, like letting go of whatever today's worries are to be present on stage for an hour. So that does actually make sense with meditation.
Yeah. I mean, our mind isn't our enemy. It does help us a lot.
Yeah.
But oftentimes it's overcompensating. And it's preventing us from having a really beautiful experience. And so that's what I think meditation and improv help us do is, yeah, you're right. Like the moment in the present might be more fulfilling than the moment in our head.
Mm-hmm. Well, you mentioned it. One of your favorite things is nonfiction storytelling or interviewing, which you said in your initial email to me. So my first question about that is I haven't heard interviewing called nonfiction storytelling before. So I'm curious where, how do those connect for you?
Well, I think like maybe last week.
All right.
Or like recently, like in the last month, I'm trying to figure out like why it is my favorite. You know, why do I love it so much? When I grew up, my mom's a clinical social worker, and we would process my emotions a lot of nights. I had a lot of anxiety, and I wanted to sort through like what that meant and like why I felt so deeply and why sometimes my mind was on overdrive. And through those conversations, I learned a lot of what it meant to ask good questions, my mom being the asker. And then just inevitably, I guess, or maybe it's a part of my DNA, I don't know, or I learned it. Like I started loving being that for my friends, but not because I wanted to fix them as much as I was legitimately curious. Like if it was as much selfish as it was selfless, which I think is the best combination for doing something is when you love it and other people benefit.
Yeah.
And you know, then I obviously got into the clinical psych stuff where I was a training clinician. So I guess that makes sense. And then I started, interviewing people, and the interviews are not much different than like the conversations I have with people outside. Like that's what I loved, was like, how can you make the conversation on mic the same as the conversation off mic to the extent that they're willing to say the same things? And so when did that become like that connection? I think recently, like when I started to craft short form stories from longer form tape, I realized that interviewing, like talking to someone to conjure up, I've been saying it's like coaxing out what already exists with curiosity. That's been like my mantra.
Yeah.
Through that, you can get the requisite tape to tell a short form story. And yeah, I believe interviewing at its purest is helping someone tell their story.
Yeah. When you were in grad school, so your master's is, did you come out with a master's in social work, a master's
clinical
in
psychology,
a master's in clinical psychology?
Yeah.
So in that coursework, was there, I mean, like, what is intro to talking to your patients look like? Is that essentially an intro to interviewing class?
Yeah, there was like a class called motivational interviewing where you would focus on like how to use interviewing as a way to get somewhere with your patient or with your client. But I'll be completely frank, a lot of the coursework was not actually intro how to talk to your patients. It was developmental psych or behavioral psych, and the intro on how to talk to your patients or clients was starting to talk to your patients. I remember my supervisor was like, I was like, okay, do I need to read the manual to like the discipline we're doing? He's like, Brandon, like in the moment when so-and-so client tells you anything out of thin air or whatever, that manual is not going to, I remember just freaking out. I was like, 22, like how in the world? And he was like, you got to kind of get in there. And I was like, okay. So I don't know if that's the program or if that's, I don't know. But yeah, there wasn't a ton of coursework dedicated to it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does interviewing for you play any part of coaching people in their meditation practice? Are you asking them like, is there any, you're asking them questions to find out like why they want to do meditation? Like what have they done? Like, is there an interview intake or interview part of it? Or is it directional and it doesn't matter what their answers to questions would be?
It's very fascinating you ask that. So I taught mostly to large groups.
Okay.
So it was very difficult to like have one-on-one connections with them. Like I would teach religious congregations. I taught combat vets. I taught schools, middle schools, high school. So it was very directional. And, I took my first meditation class when I was 20 at the University of Michigan, and our professor or teacher had us journal and meditate and then group conversation at the end. And I realized like the practice spoke for itself. The less I spoke about like trying to probe or trying to wax poetic, and the more I just led the practice, the more it spoke for itself. I remember someone during a group class looked at me once and said, "You talk too much, talk less." And I was like, "Oh my goodness, you're right." The group conversation part after the practice, I used to respond after someone said what their experience was, and then I stopped. I literally was just creating space. What people needed was just the permission to sit down and be led. They didn't need much from me.
Okay.
Yeah. And so that was a time where I learned to say less, to ask less, to do less, and just help facilitate people notice their breath.
Yeah. Huh. And then you get into your van?
Yeah, the pandemic hits, and I was just like, I don't have the meditation work right now. I always kind of had a back of my head dream of doing van life, whatever that meant. I had led trips out west before, and so I was like, this time feels perfect for me to.
Sure.
I'm not like squandering opportunities right now. So I just lived for 3 months at different national park campgrounds and interviewed people I met on Instagram.
Nice. And were those video podcasts? Were they video? They were like video. They were for YouTube.
Yeah, they were just video YouTube, like kind of like what we're doing right now, like recording. Just I was at a park with them, and it was just like candid long form, cut nothing out.
Yeah. Just
set up. I had like this whole gear with me and like this little. I like converted the third row of seats to like some container for the gear or something.
Nice.
Yeah.
And you would charge everything on solar?
Yeah.
Really?
Exactly. Yeah. So I had like a solar panel that connected to this external battery. You could recharge the battery when you were driving too.
Okay.
But yeah, that's how I like worked. That's how I worked off my laptop with solar.
Neat. And were they other van life people or just other people near you on the campground?
People local to the community. Yeah. So I would search like an Instagram, like hashtag Portland music. And then I'd find someone with, it didn't matter, like 10 followers. Like I was actually more intrigued by someone who wasn't widely known, who would appreciate being featured.
Yeah.
And I just found really sweet people. Like one person took me to this farm where there were plums growing, and we just like recorded a podcast interview in like this, by these plum trees. I was eating a plum while interviewing.
what are some of your, so that's a standout interview from that. Is there anyone that stayed in your life?
A few like via Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
Like, those kind of like peripheral,
Yeah.
they see what you're doing, they like your story, but you're not talking.
Right.
Not many people from that trip.
Yeah.
But there were a lot that I interviewed in Detroit before heading out. That was still part of my band series. That like my English teacher from middle school. That was a pretty cool one.
Nice.
Yeah.
So were those interviews pre-COVID or during COVID?
They were during, and you'll see I had these like, the brand's called Helinox, and you could like put these chairs together, fold them up, and we separated them by like 6 feet. So it's almost absurd. Like the shot had to be really wide.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And they're outdoors.
And you're outside.
Yeah.
Okay. So you start by interviewing people you do know in Detroit.
Yeah.
And so like you said, they're candid, they're long form, you're not doing much editing or any editing.
Yeah, just like picking the angle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was there a general theme to those interviews?
At the time, no. I think I was like, it was just like, I was like purposefully vague. I was just like, I want to talk to people about what makes them most human, which is like anything in the world.
Right.
No, there wasn't. I really just like wanted the chance to help people open up. Or maybe I wanted the chance to witness someone open up. Maybe it was for me as much as it was for them. It was more for me than it was for them, probably, actually, that show. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, because it was COVID and you needed to talk to someone not about COVID.
Right. It came up a couple times. But I don't know. I think I wanted to learn how to use camera and audio, and like I'm very like experiential. Like I like making things as a result of learning.
Yeah.
So this new show I just made, like I'd never mixed and mastered audio before, so I learned how to use Pro Tools.
Yeah. So the new show, Humanize through Human Eyes. So your learning goal was learn how to make something short form.
Sure, that was one of them. That was like probably the main goal, but it was like I want to learn how to make a show almost by myself.
Okay.
Yeah. Because I've been so involved in the podcasting world professionally now that I see all these teams that are partnering in departments, and I'm like, okay, make the thumbnail, try and, make edit the audio, cut the story, set up the audio and video gear, record it, book the guest, cut the clips, so that there are all these things that, caption the clips. Okay, do you want a border on the clips? All these things that I'm trying to do right.
Yeah. All I dream of is finding a team.
Oh my goodness. It's night and day. I don't want to be doing everything.
No.
Yeah.
No, when I finally decided, so I started in May of 2020. So I'm coming up on 5 years of doing this podcast. And a year plus, is when I finally was like, I either have to find a new workflow, which is when I got Descript. Because I was just like, I love doing interviews. I hate editing.
Yeah.
Right.
I get it.
Like the amount of time it takes me to, if I do an episode on my own, there's the hour plus of the interview. Then there's double that time to edit it. Right. So if it's a 1 hour interview plus 2 hours of editing, and I've never learned any of the advanced sound design stuff. So if there's if the microphone is rubbing on something, or if the sound is off, I never learned the skills. Now my ear has caught up and I can hear that there's a problem.
Yep.
And my skills aren't there to fix it. And weirdly, the guy who makes the best videos on these tools, I used to work with at a bar in Colorado, and I have bad feelings about him. So like the best tutorials are from someone I worked with in Colorado. Like it's bananas.
Okay, we got to find you a different option tutorial wise.
Well, the option was I went from every week to every other week, and I hired a I hired Rob Abrazado to be my editor.
Okay.
Right. And I was like, great. So now Rob handles the editing, and he has both the ear and the skills to make the sound professional. But that's like part of the only reason the podcast still exists is because I was said, okay, I'm going to put some of my money towards an editor, and that's worth it to me to get to keep doing these interviews.
Yeah. Yeah. You found where your skill set applies to. On your values hierarchy, what brought you the most joy and meaning in the podcast, and outsource it elsewhere. And that's beautiful. Yeah.
So, but you're the flip. You came from doing podcasts as part of a team, and you're like, but what if I did all of it?
Yeah.
How are you sourcing guests for your new podcast?
They're all friends, at least these first ones. So I just called them randomly when I had the idea, and I was just like, hey, can we just be on my show? And they were just like, yes. So that's been the booking for this one. And then I started booking for season 2. And I'm going a little bit more against the grain there. I walked into this cool photo store that was local, and I grew up as a kid, like getting photos made, there, and, transitioning whatever VHSs to DVDs or whatever we did. And I was just talking to the owner, and he was so passionate. And I was like, oh, cool. Like, will you be on my show? I didn't even mean to. And he was like, yeah. And then season 3, I think I'm going to do like a long form documentary style. Okay. So I just got a bunch of musicians in LA to commit being part of this documentary. So I think season 3 will be like my learning on how to make a full length doc and not just like short form episodes. Yeah. So each, like, it's all dedicated towards a goal. Season 1 was just like feature your friends, celebrate your friends. Season 2, I guess, was just like branch out a little bit. And season 3 is like learn how to make a doc. Yeah.
So something that caught my ear earlier, boy, I promise I meant to ask this question 15 minutes ago. It's coming back around. Was that you have said a few times is that you really value helping people, learning about people's humanity, helping them connect to it. So I'm curious about, what does that mean to you?
Well,
or maybe not humanity, but humanizing things. Maybe that's more the word you used, and I switched it to humanity.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Again, I want to be very careful that I'm not like coming off like I pretend like I'm a therapist, because I'm not. I'm not a licensed clinician, but I believe there's some similarities in interviewing and in therapy, in that I keep coming back to this line, like coaxing out what already exists with curiosity, right? Like, I'm not creating anything for them. Like, the art of a question is to, I guess you could help someone have a revelation, but it came from within them. I'm not like didactically teaching them anything. Like, I'm not proselytizing in an interview. I'm not telling them. It's asking, it's yes-anding. And so I think if I truly am curious without a motive of coming off as teacher, then I can coax out what already exists within them. And the best outcome for them is to feel heard, feel celebrated, maybe reinforce something that they've been thinking about, or change their mind if that's what needed to happen. To me, that's humanizing. Not as much as like, maybe defense mechanism-y or whatever. You asked me at the beginning, you were like, okay, do you have any like professional titles or that? And I think that's not a bad thing to ask. That's a very common thing for people who go on podcasts. But for me, I get, it's my own defense mechanism. It's my own insecurity of like, no, like I only want to be, like, I don't want to be anything. Like, I don't want to be known for, I just want to be like a cool conversationalist that like you felt like it was worth it to spend an hour and 20 minutes talking to. Like, right. That's actually it. Yeah. And so that's, to me, humanizing a conversation, especially in the culture where a lot of celebrities are doing their podcast tours. And, on your 10 favorite podcasts, you hear the same person on 10 because they have something coming out and they're going on their promo tour, which is fine. But for me, I'm like, who featured my buddy Jay about his public speaking in Metro Detroit? Like, right. Nobody.
Right. So I took a writing class many years ago. Kim Clark, he has since passed away. He had the Acorn Theater in Three Oaks, Michigan. I started with like an 8-week writing class with him. And then some of us he invited to like stick around and be a part of his writing studio. And he would give us a writing prompt at the end of class. And that's what we would write that week. And then we'd come back and we would read to each other and check in. But in the 8-week class, he would not permit us to ask or say what we did for work.
Yeah, right, exactly.
He was like, that is not a question you're allowed to ask, and it is not a way you're allowed to introduce yourselves to each other.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So when we all went out to dinner after the final class, like we went to this pizza place near Chicago and Ogden, and we were like, all right, fine. What do you do for a living?
Right.
We've gotten to know each other on like a very deep level over the last 2 months where like people are processing and we're sharing these big stories with each other, and all without the frame of capitalist America of like, but what do you do?
Right.
And we still at the end of 2 months, we're like, okay, yeah, we're all soul sisters here. What do you do? And then you find out that like their professions don't match what you've learned about them over the last 2 months. Because what we have to do, our day jobs, hopefully, you know, if your day job isn't your vocation, like it doesn't define you. And hopefully you can get to a place where it doesn't define you or exhaust you.
Yeah, I mean, spot on.
Yeah.
Like, I love that guidance that I think is very akin. I'm glad you shared it. It's very akin to what I shared. In your defense, to all the people who asked that question, I do think there is at least a little something it can tell you, given that it's what that person is spending, you know, if they have an 8-hour, job a day, they are spending a lot of time doing it. So it couldn't hurt knowing how they spend a lot of their time. But you're so right that it doesn't define their character traits or their joys or their loves. Yeah.
Well, it's also, you know, probably half of my guests are authors. And so even if they have a day job unrelated to writing, that's not what they, it's how do you want to be introduced?
Right.
You're an author, whatever that is, I want people to give a chance to tell me. So I don't just go to their LinkedIn and say, oh, well, you know, she's a product manager. And she's like, no, I write surreal, YA fiction. Oh, okay.
That's awesome.
Right. We won't talk about the product managing then.
Yeah, right. Well, I'm glad you asked me. I think it's beautiful that you have that intention.
Yeah. Do you have, when you think about the art of interviewing or the art of nonfiction storytelling, do you have a practice of learning? Like, are there, are you a Terry Gross stan? Do you have interviewers that you really admire and you are trying to learn from? Or are you learning in the moment and just trying to do better the next time?
Yeah, I do. I actually thought about this before we talked, because I was like, do I have people that I've looked to? And I definitely do. It wasn't like I got to study them, but it was, I think I just learned from them. I think what I found is I have like more candid interviewers, like the show I'm doing where you're just like interviewing someone to talk. But then I also found myself learning from like absurdist interviews, like ones that were wild, especially like on the channel Adult Swim. So like, for example, the Eric Andre show, or he's from Canada, Tom Green. I mean, they were wild in ways I would never think of being. But there was something about the absurdism, about the unexpected, that brought people to the present moment. Now, contrary, someone like, for me, like probably was my favorite late night interviewer, I'll watch this religiously, is Dick Cavett. There's a video of Dick Cavett like talking to Paul Simon about how he No, he's in the middle of writing and figuring out Bridge Over Troubled Water. And I think he's literally just asking questions, but he's actually watching Paul play and talk. And you can see, and unless he's a good faker, like he's listening and he's giving Paul the space. It's not like, I don't want to rip modern day late night because there are some awesome hosts, but oftentimes it feels like a lot of stimulation, a lot of excitement. One thing that drew me to Dick Cavett was the space, the spaciousness, the slow pace that he created. Whereas someone like Letterman, who I like a lot too, leaned more on the absurd.
Yeah.
So I think I vacillate between these two ways of being in the present moment, the absurd and really candid, vulnerable, soft, spacious.
Yeah.
Right now, this show I'm working on is very soft, spacious, curious. So yeah.
I don't know if you have a chance to see it. Sean Hayes from, Smartless now is what he's known for. Had a show that ran in Chicago first, went to Broadway, and now it's going to the West End in London. And I would say worth getting on a plane to go see is Goodnight Oscar.
Not familiar at all.
He is playing it's a real man, Oscar Levant, who was Gershwin's. He is the reason like Gershwin has a legacy. Gershwin died young, but he kept playing Gershwin's music and like kept bringing Gershwin to the public. And he was also like a popular guest on Dick Cavett and panel shows. So he was a classically trained pianist and also a witty guy. And this is about Dick Cavett is doing the first live show from LA of the Dick Cavett show. It's a really big deal. He's left New York. He's in LA for the week. And they have gotten Oscar Levant out of a psych unit for the night to be on the Dick Cavett show.
Wow.
And he is drugged out of his mind. And it all takes place in the dressing room. So it's all before the show in the dressing room. And then it ends with him playing Rhapsody in Blue. Sean Hayes playing the most beautiful, like in character, performing Rhapsody in Blue. And he won Tonys for it, and he'll win whatever the West End Award is for it, I'm sure. But you can go on YouTube and watch the episode. Like, you can watch the episode with Oscar Levant and see what happened on stage that night. And this play is like what happened backstage.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is there an order I should go in terms of which one I watch first?
Depends on when you're going to London.
Yeah. So. Not anytime soon.
Yeah. But the stuff in the play that happens during the episode of the show happens, you can just watch it on YouTube. Like, it is line for line.
Wow.
What really happened. And it was a really phenomenal, the play was amazing. Sean Hayes, truly revelatory. The best role of his life, I'm sure. But as far as like what late night used to make room for.
I mean, that's well put, right? I like that line. What late night used to make room for. That's exactly it.
Yeah. Do you have dream guests? So season 3, going to LA, doing a documentary about music. Are those musicians your vision board dream guests, or is there a season 4? Like, who are some of your like really aspirational people that you would like to get to talk to?
I'm already doing it.
Okay.
Yeah. So for me, it really is. I'm sure I'm maybe like, but there are some, and I'm just like defense mechanisming them and being like, no, it's not about the guests. But no, for me, like, I sat down few months ago with one of my best friends, creative collaborators. His name's Scotty, and he's an actor. And he told a story that I had no idea about how he got into acting because of his grandfather. He used to do like absurd pantomiming and acting.
Mm-hmm.
And in the interview, he sent me old footage of his Papa Bill, and we like side by sided them pantomiming the same thing. And he's going to show his Papa Bill that when it comes out. Like, that could make me cry. I get chills saying that.
Yeah.
That's my aspirational guest, is like someone I adore and love, so anyone that'll open up to me and that'll make me feel in the moment like they're the only person in the world, that's who I want to talk to.
Okay. Not me. My goal is to get Jason Mantzoukas on the podcast.
And hey, I would love to watch that episode.
And that will be the finale.
Yeah, hell of a guest. I saw Jason do, he was like part of a improv troupe in LA. I think it was at Dynasty Typewriter or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen him do improv. I've had Paul Scheer on. So I'm circling the drain in the universe.
Yeah, that is certainly in the universe. Yeah.
But I also think, so when I started this podcast, I wrote, like, I got IMDb Pro for a week, and I emailed Jason Mantzoukas' people. And thank God he said no. Because I am a more skilled interviewer now. That's not even like, I think I'm better. Like, I know that I'm better at doing this 5 years in than I was at the beginning. And so, yeah, I'm glad he said no. And I love that I started with my friends. Like, because it also gave us permission. I think one of the things I like about doing a podcast interview as a construct is you have permission to skip the small talk.
That's right. Yep.
Right? You need to do some. It's why I always start with some small talk, is because we do need to get comfortable with each other. But I do appreciate that we can jump to something, we can get knee deep.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, the small talk makes me more anxious than deep talk.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you feel when you interview now? You had mentioned that you did it because of, COVID and wanting to talk to someone. Like, what do you feel emotionally, or is it like a mental simulation thing? Like, why do you like talking to people, either that you've met or haven't met? Like someone like me, you've never met. It was,
right.
What are you feeling right now? What drives you?
I enjoy talking to new people. I find that the one-on-one interview format, right? Small talk at a conference, exhausting, overstimulating, too much happening. I got to figure out, like, are we supposed to be talking to each other? Is there someone else, right?
Yep.
Whereas this is, we've decided we're going to talk for at least an hour. I get to know someone new. You may or may not stay in my life. And sometimes I ask people questions they've never been asked before, and I get a big little boost of dopamine when that happens. I love asking somebody something that they just have never considered.
Yeah.
And I like getting to take people seriously about something they love that's not their job. That we get asked our love stories and our professional stories. Those are the stories we get asked to tell in public, right? And asking people, so for example, I'll pull them up in front of the camera. These are Black Hawk 200 pencils sent to me by Chuck Gay, who's a musician and actor in Seattle, in the Seattle area. And he sent me these because we talked about his favorite pencils and the sandwich he makes for lunch every day.
Oh my goodness.
Right?
Yeah.
And then I'm like, where's my fountain pen? So sometimes I'm picking up like little hobbies. The risk of this podcast is it could be expensive if I took everybody's advice. Like, I would have $1,000 fountain pen collection. I would have like, right, like the things that people love are so diverse that even when people want to, like, I've done 2 episodes about loving New Kids on the Block. Right? Like, one is a physician, and like, great, let's talk seriously about your love of New Kid on the Block for an hour and a half. And I think it's a gift to talk to people about something they love. Because, you know, I think there's a lot of jokes about info dumping and stuff. So yeah, I suspect a lot of my guests are neurodivergent. During COVID, I a couple times had married couples where they were on different weeks where they were like, thank you for giving my husband someone else to talk to about his swords. Right? Where it was like, it was peak COVID. Please, my husband, he needs to talk about his swords. So sometimes it's a release valve. Sometimes it's just, right? I'm just a blank canvas on my most popular episode was when one of my nephews requested about flipping knives, bolsung knives, like switchblades.
Oh, yeah.
But like, so there's this company called Squid, or his name online is Squidmaster, and it's the only American manufacturer of switchblades. They make them specifically for the hobby of flipping them, of doing like acrobatic knife flipping. And it is my all-time most listened to episode.
It's incredible.
Because like teens get into that hobby, and this is like the best interview the guy ever gave.
Wow.
Because I don't know anything about knives. And I get his whole story, and people, every year it's my most listened to episode.
And that coming from I don't want to project onto you, but that coming from a childlike state of mind about something where you don't know too much.
Yeah.
And you don't come off as a professional, and you're speaking for like the every person in the audience.
Yeah.
Is how to sometimes get the best interview. Sometimes knowledge, a requisite knowledge base is good topically, but yeah, I often find the same, that when you can ask like really baseline questions about something, it will be the best interview someone's given. But
also with what I do here, I don't need you to be an expert in fountain pens.
Right.
I need you to be an expert in you and why you love a fountain pen. Like, and so probably my number one question is like, let's time travel. Like, let's go back to the first fountain pen you ever encountered. Like, let's go back to that first pen. You know, let's go back. So you a little bit scooped me saying like that the way your mom would help you process emotions was essentially by interviewing you at the end of the day.
That's right. At least that's how I remember it.
Yeah. Do you have a memory of the first time you intentionally or unintentionally like did that to someone else?
You know, it's so interesting. I'm hopefully going to think out loud and find my way there. The way my memory works, I don't know if it's ever since I started meditating, but it doesn't exist so much anymore in events. Like, it's like it exists in concepts.
Okay.
Like, I know that my mom and I would talk, but I don't I can't see it or hear it. Like, it's intellectual. When would have been the last time I really remember? Maybe in graduate school when I had dropped out and I met this group of Long Island musicians, and I had a lot of time on my hands, and I just started getting into collecting vinyl records, and they'd all come over and we'd listen to like pop punk vinyl and talk about philosophy and life. And I do remember then becoming extremely curious. Now, granted, I guess I was fresh out of clinical psych school, so maybe I was primed for it.
Sure.
I remember that a little bit.
Yeah.
But I got to be honest with you. Also, I do think it's been who I am perpetually.
Right.
I think it was a way to cope with my own anxiety too. It was like, if I can get someone to open up and tell me about how deep they're feeling, my feeling deep will make sense.
Yeah.
Like, it's how I see it. Doesn't make sense to me. Small talk doesn't, I can't wrap my head around it.
Yeah. I think the only reason I can wrap my head around it was I had one class on sociolinguistics my freshman year of college where we learned the phrase phatic communication.
Not familiar.
PHATIC. That is walking in the hallway. Hey, what's up? Good. It's just the little things. And that the goal of phatic communication and why you greet people in the hallway is to keep the door open for bigger conversations. So small talk is phatic communication and small talk, I think, based whatever, it was 1995. What do I really remember? I think are probably different, but the phatic communication, the in passing, those keep a relationship existing so that when you need to like knock on someone's door and like sit down and have a talk, the door is unlocked.
It's like maintenance.
It's maintenance.
Yeah.
Which I do think that's different than small talk.
Yeah, I think it is different too. As soon as you said it, I was like, that feels different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's so hard to skip the small talk.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Sometimes the way I've been doing it lately is whenever I call a friend, I just blurt something out.
Right.
So like they'll call me and I'll just say like exactly what I'm doing. Like I'll just like, that seems to work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also, would say I was a blogger I started blogging in 2003. Like I blogged for a long time. I was on Twitter in 2007. My 20s and 30s were very documented online. And now in my 40s, I'm still a very online person, but I put less out there.
Yeah.
And sometimes now when I talk to my friends, I'm like, oh, you don't know that the apartment flooded, that this happened, that happened, because I don't put it online. I don't put every complaint online anymore. And I don't put like every big personal mountain I'm climbing online anymore. And so sometimes I'm like, why are we? Oh, I was like, oh, right. You don't know that like these 3 huge things have happened. Because the way that we would have had that maintained some of that information about each other have been taken over by Nazis. So we don't use that anymore. So it's hard.
Yeah. There's not as much of a preface to that final outcome.
Mm-hmm.
And so that context is gone.
Yeah. Well, Brandon, is there anything about nonfiction storytelling or interviewing that I haven't asked you about that you would be so bummed to walk away and be like, why didn't I say it?
No, I don't think I ever feel that way. I really want, especially in this context, I want what I say to be perpetuated by your curiosity and not as much my compulsion to share.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd almost divert that to you if there was something that you felt I didn't articulate well enough, or that, if there was something that going into this you just haven't asked yet. I'm assuming you probably, because you asked that question, probably because you have exhausted what you wanted. But yeah, no, there's nothing. I never feel, especially like we spoke for an hour about me mostly. That's a lot about me.
That's my trick.
Yeah. You got me.
It is also your trick. You're like, oh man, usually I don't have to talk so much about myself.
I don't have a hard time doing it.
Yeah.
When it's like set for this, but I do find that when I'm talking to people, it's mostly not about me, just because I am asking a lot. I'm asking too many questions for them to ask one about me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I am curious. Have you listened to Rishikesh Hirway's podcast Song Exploder?
Yeah, I have.
Because he cuts out the interview. He is cut out of the interview, right?
Yeah,
What
so
do
I
you-
mostly cut myself out of the interview for this new show.
you do?
I think I left myself in for a total of maybe 9 seconds per interview.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I think that is it's an interesting conceit.
Yeah, I don't, it could be for a myriad of reasons because, could be because we think the story's legitimately more profound without us, or it's a defense mechanism that we're not that important. I don't know. It could be a time thing. For this one, it was more, I really wanted, not that you can't celebrate someone with someone else in there. It's not true at all. But I more just wanted to see how necessary was I beyond facilitating the answer.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see. I don't think anyone will watch and be like, we needed more Brandon. I don't think I'm going to be receiving that feedback. I really promise you. I mean it. They're going to get so engrossed in the story. But some interviews I've done or some things I've done, it was really helpful to have me there. And it was helpful to see me bounce. So it's more of just an exercise than anything.
Yeah. So people can find the new show on YouTube, Humanize. I mean, it's punny. So you say it. You say
Humanize the Human Eyes, but people have come up with their own derivations of it.
Yeah.
And I readily accept.
Okay.
It's going to be on my YouTube channel, Brandon Klein, which is youtube.com/@Brandon M. Klein, I think. I'll also drop it for you so that you can, if you put that in show notes or whatever, you can have it. And I'm Brandon Klein on Instagram, but the Brandon has a 0 instead of the O because my sister had been doing her handle like that. Her name's Molly Klein. And she'd been doing that, and I said, like sister, like brother, like sister, however you say it. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Is there anywhere else you want to be found online?
No, I'm pretty much YouTube and Instagram is where I reside. I don't even know if I have anything else. I have a Medium that I'm writing on a little bit, but that's kind of, if you find it, you find it. Soon enough, when my book comes out, that'll be fun. But no, just YouTube and Instagram feels good.
Great. And you'll come back when the book comes out.
Yeah, if you want to have me and if you peruse and you find it at all interesting, I'm down.
All right. Well, Brandon, this has been a delightful way to start my Sunday. Thank you so much for joining me.
I feel the same way. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to Finding Favorites with Leah Jones. Please make sure to subscribe and drop us a 5-star review on iTunes. Now, go out and enjoy your favorite things.